Welcome to the Deep Dive.
Great to be here.
Today, we're plunging into something really fascinating, the architecture of New York City.
Yeah, it's a huge topic.
It is. And you, our listener, have given us a great collection of sources. Our mission really is to kind of distill the essence of what makes NYC's architecture so distinctive, how it evolved.
Absolutely. And when you think New York, I mean, that image of the concrete jungle, that incredible skyline, it pops right into your head.
Instantly, yeah.
But the real story, I think, is the sheer variety. Just
Right.
so many styles packed together.
And that reflects the history, right? The culture, trade, immigration.
Exactly. It's all baked into the buildings. A global crossroads, really.
Okay, so let's maybe start with the basics. The materials. I found it interesting how that Great Fire in 1835 was such a turning point.
Oh, yeah. Huge turning point.
Yeah.
Before that, lots of wood.
Right, and after.
Brick and stone became the rule, pretty much. For safety, obviously.
Makes sense.
And what's cool is, unlike maybe some European cities that used mostly local stone, New York brought it in from all over. So you get this amazing range of textures and colors in the older buildings.
Huh. Hadn't thought about that variety.
Yeah. And speaking of details people miss, those wooden water towers
Mm.
on top of older buildings.
Oh, yeah, you see them everywhere.
Mm.
Kind of charming, actually.
They are, but they weren't just for looks. Back in the 19th century, city water pressure, well, it just couldn't get water up reliably to buildings over 6 stories.
No way. Seriously.
Seriously. So those tanks were essential. Gravity-fed water for the upper floors.
Yeah, wow. That's ingenious, born out of necessity.
Exactly.
Okay, so taking it way back, what were the very first architectural footprints?
Well, you got to start with the Dutch, right? New Amsterdam.
Uh-huh.
You can still find, hints of it. Maybe a gambrel roof shape here and there, especially down the Wall Street area, if you look closely.
Okay, subtle nods. And then the British took over.
Right. And with them came Georgian architecture. Think symmetry, classical proportions. Very ordered, very balanced.
Okay. And then the 19th century.
Right.
Population boom.
Yeah, massive boom. And that's when the brownstones really take off.
Ah, yes. The classic New York row house look.
Yeah.
Brooklyn Heights, Upper West Side.
Exactly. They needed housing, and brownstones were a relatively affordable, efficient way to build dense residential neighborhoods.
And they used that specific stone, Connecticut brownstone.
Yeah, so much so that the material itself basically gave the building type its name. You say brownstone, people picture that row house.
Right. Okay, so we've got this foundation brick, stone, brownstones.
Mm-hmm.
But then the city starts looking up.
Mm-hmm. The skyscraper era begins, late 19th, early 20th century.
What made that possible? Just ambition?
Ambition, sure, but also technology. Huge technological leaps.
Like elevators.
Elevators were critical, yeah. Safe, reliable elevators. And new construction methods, steel frames, coming out of the Industrial Revolution. Plus, you just had land getting incredibly scarce and expensive in Manhattan. So going vertical wasn't just possible, it was almost necessary.
And early examples, like the Flatiron Building.
The Flatiron, yeah. Completed 1902. Such a distinctive shape, obviously, dictated by the site, but a real landmark of that early push upwards.
But it wasn't just a free-for-all, build as high as you can situation, was it?
Yeah.
There were rules coming in.
That's a really important point. The 1916 zoning resolution.
Okay, what prompted that?
Well, some of these new buildings, like the Equitable Building, were just enormous sheer blocks. They cast these huge shadows, blocking sun and air from the streets below.
Ah, I see. Quality of life issue.
Definitely. So the city stepped in and said, okay, new buildings have to have setbacks. They have to step back as they go higher.
To let the light in.
To let the light in. And
Yep.
that single rule directly created that characteristic wedding cake or ziggurat shape you see in so many classic New York skyscrapers from that period.
Fascinating. Which brings us right into the Roaring Twenties and that almost legendary race to the sky.
Oh, yeah. Pure drama and ambition, played out in steel and stone. Developers were fiercely competing for the title of world's tallest building.
So who are the main players?
Well, for a very brief moment in May 1930, 40 Wall Street, the Bank of Manhattan building, held the title.
Briefly.
Very briefly. Because Walter Chrysler had a trick up his sleeve. His architects secretly assembled this incredible spire inside the top of the Chrysler building.
No way.
Yeah, and then they hoisted it up right at the end, surprising everyone. Completed later in 1930, it blew past 40 Wall Street and became the first building ever to top 1,000 feet.
Wow. That spire. The whole Chrysler building, really, it's stunning. The V-shaped lights, the gargoyles.
Peak Art Deco, absolutely gorgeous. It's often cited as many people's favorite skyscraper.
I can see why. But even its reign was short.
Very short. Just about a year later, May 1931, boom, the Empire State Building opens.
The icon.
The icon smashed the height record, first building over 100 stories,
Yeah.
named after New York State's nickname, the Empire State. Built incredibly fast, to just over a year, about 14 months.
Incredible.
Yeah.
And that spire on top was added later.
The very top pinnacle, yeah, that was added a bit later, pushing it even higher. And its observation deck, I mean, it became, and still is, a massive draw.
So Art Deco seems like the signature style for NYC in this period.
It really is, yeah. You see it everywhere from that time. Beyond Chrysler and Empire State, you've got Rockefeller Center,
Right. 30 Rock.
30 Rock, originally the RCA building, now Comcast. A whole complex unified by that streamlined, geometric Art Deco aesthetic and that amazing frieze over the entrance.
I remember the quote.
Yeah, from Isaiah. Wisdom and knowledge shall be the stability of thy times. Really captures the spirit of the age, you know? Optimism, progress.
Definitely. We should probably also mention a couple of other key buildings from around then.
Oh, for sure. Can't forget the Woolworth Building.
Earlier, right, 1913.
Yeah, 1913. An early giant called the Cathedral of Commerce. It's Gothic revival, but on a skyscraper scale. Really ornate, beautiful terracotta details.
Okay, and Grand Central.
Grand Central Terminal, also 1913. Just a masterpiece of Beaux-Arts design. Reed and Stem, Warren and Wetmore were the architects. It's a National Historic Landmark, and thankfully still functions as this grand gateway to the city.
Thank goodness it wasn't torn down like Penn Station.
We'll get to that, but yeah, Grand Central is a treasure.
Okay, so we have this explosion of height, this flourishing of decorative styles like Art Deco and Beaux-Arts. But then things change again mid-century, a shift towards something
A
simpler.
major shift, yeah. Post-World War II, the mood changes. The modernist movement really takes hold.
Led by architects like
Figures like Mies van der Rohe, Le Corbusier, hugely influential. The focus shifts dramatically towards simplicity, functionality. Form follows function becomes the mantra.
and new materials play a big role.
Absolutely. Steel, glass, reinforced concrete. Modernism wanted to express these materials honestly without hiding them behind ornamentation. It was partly philosophical, you know, a reaction against the old ways after the wars, but also about efficiency.
And this leads to the international style. Sounds very clinical.
And it can feel that way sometimes, yeah. It grew out of European movements like German functionalism or Bauhaus. Think clean lines, simple geometric shapes, flat roofs, and crucially, no applied ornamentation.
Any key NYC examples?
Well, an early one is 330 West 42nd Street from 31,
Hmm.
but the really iconic one is the Seagram Building.
Mies van der Rohe again.
Mies, along with Philip Johnson, yeah. 1958. It's considered a masterpiece. That dark glass, the expressed bronze mullions on the outside. It's incredibly elegant in its minimalism, and it set the template for corporate skyscrapers worldwide for decades.
So this clean minimalist look becomes dominant. But you mentioned Penn Station earlier. That demolition seems like a key moment of pushback.
It was the key moment, absolutely critical. The original Pennsylvania Station was this breathtaking Beaux-Arts monument, just incredible civic architecture.
And they tore it down.
Tore it down in the 1960s to build Madison Square Garden and an office tower. The public outcry was immense. People were horrified. We used to enter the city like gods, one critic famously said. Now we scuttle in like rats.
Wow. Powerful.
It really galvanized the preservation movement. That loss directly led to the creation of the New York City Landmarks Preservation Commission in 1965.
So a silver lining in a way. It changed how the city viewed its own history.
Definitely. It forced a conversation about what's worth saving, about balancing development with heritage, a conversation that's still ongoing, frankly.
So amidst this rise of modernism and the dawn of preservation, what other significant buildings mark this mid-century period?
Well, you get these massive corporate headquarters. The MetLife building, originally the Pan Am building, opened in '63. Controversial because it sits right over Grand Central, blocking the view down Park Avenue, but it was the world's largest commercial office space at the time.
Okay.
Yep.
And the Twin Towers.
The original World Trade Center towers, yeah, completed in 1973. They briefly became the world's tallest, surpassing the Empire State Building before Chicago's Sears Tower took the title. Their design was very much in that minimalist international style vein.
Right. Any others from that sort of post-war boom?
Citigroup Center is interesting. 1977, very distinctive slanted roof, originally designed for solar panels. It's also famous for being built on stilts over a church.
On stilts.
Yeah, they had to accommodate St. Peter's Church, which owned the land. And it has this massive weight inside, a tuned mass damper, basically a giant concrete block on hydraulics to counteract sway from the wind. Fascinating engineering.
Okay, so we've gone from ornate deco to minimalist modernism. Where does architecture go next, heading towards the end of the 20th century? Does modernism just continue?
Not exactly. You start to see a reaction against what some felt was a coldness or austerity of modernism. Postmodernism emerges.
Postmodernism, what does that look like?
It sort of brings back elements that modernism rejected. Ornamentation, historical references, sometimes in a playful or ironic way.
Yeah.
Color comes back, different shapes.
Okay, like what's a famous example in New York?
The AT&T building, now the Sony building, designed by Philip Johnson, who ironically was also key in the Seagram building. It's got that broken pediment top, famously nicknamed the Chippendale top after the furniture style.
Right, that's instantly recognizable. Very different from the Seagram.
Completely different, a deliberate move away from pure functionalism.
And then things get even wilder with deconstructivism.
Yeah, that comes along a bit later, late 20th century. It's even more radical. It challenges traditional ideas of harmony and stability in architecture. Buildings look fragmented, disjointed, almost like they're exploding or collapsing.
Sounds chaotic.
Can look that way, yeah. Think buildings like 8 Spruce Street, designed by Frank Gehry, with that wavy, rippling facade. Or the IAC building, also Gehry, looks like sails. It's about breaking down forms and reassembling them in unexpected ways.
Okay, so bringing us into the 21st century, what are the big themes now?
Well, obviously, the rebuilding after 9/11 has been a major focus in Lower Manhattan. One World Trade Center is the centerpiece there.
What's the style of One World Trade?
It's described as having linear symmetries, kind of neo-futuristic, designed by David Childs, collaborating with Daniel Libeskind, whose master plan won the competition. It's meant to be symbolic, rising to 1776 feet.
Gotcha. What else is shaping 21st century building?
Sustainability is huge now. Green design. You see buildings like the Condé Nast building at 4 Times Square, one of the early pioneers with gas-fired absorption chillers and solar panels. Or the Hearst Tower, Norman Foster's design, built on top of the original 1920s base. It achieved a LEED Gold rating for its environmental features.
That's a positive trend.
Definitely. Another big thing is the changing skyline beyond Manhattan. Brooklyn, especially downtown Brooklyn, has seen a massive building boom. Same in Long Island City, Queens.
Is that welcomed?
It's mixed. There's excitement about growth, but also pushback from local groups worried about losing neighborhood character, human scale, affordability, the usual tensions.
And Manhattan keeps reaching higher too, right? The super talls.
Oh, yeah. There's been a wave of incredibly tall, incredibly slender residential towers, mostly luxury, clustered especially around the south end of Central Park Billionaires Row. Buildings like Central Park Tower, 111 West 57th Street, 1 Vanderbilt near Grand Central, 432 Park Avenue. They've dramatically reshaped the classic skyline profile, and new ones are still going up, like 270 Park Avenue.
It seems relentless. But New York isn't just Manhattan skyscrapers. What about where most people live? How did the outer boroughs develop residentially?
Well, that expansion was intrinsically linked to infrastructure, bridges, subways. They opened up vast areas of the Bronx, Queens, Brooklyn, even Staten Island later on.
So the Brooklyn Bridge wasn't just an engineering marvel, it was a catalyst for development.
Absolutely. It spurred the growth of Brooklyn Heights as one of the first commuter suburbs. People could live in Brooklyn and work in Manhattan easily.
And you see different housing types out there, not just brownstones.
Right. You get a whole mix. More apartment buildings, detached and semi-detached single-family homes, especially as you get further out. The style often reflects when an area developed and its transit access.
Any specific examples?
Yeah.
Like those garden apartments?
Yeah, places like Jackson Heights in Queens became really popular in the 1920s for their garden apartment complexes. They offered more green space, more light and air than traditional tenements, a different model for urban living.
And then there were the public housing projects.
Right. Starting mainly in the 1950s, often part of large-scale urban renewal efforts led by figures like Robert Moses. Huge complexes meant to replace slums with modern housing.
But they had their own problems?
They did, yeah. Architecturally, many were quite stark towers in the park, and they often faced significant social challenges, becoming isolated pockets of poverty. It's a complex legacy.
Okay, you mentioned infrastructure being key. Given NYC's geography islands, rivers, bridges, and tunnels must be architecturally significant too.
Absolutely essential. Manhattan and Staten Island are islands. Brooklyn and Queens are on the western tip of Long Island. Water is everywhere. So connecting these places was paramount.
And some were record breakers.
Many were, yes. The Holland Tunnel was the world's first mechanically ventilated underwater vehicular tunnel. Huge deal.
Wow.
And the Brooklyn Bridge, when it opened, was the longest suspension bridge in the world by far, and the first to use steel wire for its main cables. Those massive stone towers, neo-Gothic style, are just iconic.
Do the bridges have different architectural styles themselves?
They do. The Queensboro Bridge is a cantilever bridge, totally different look. The Manhattan Bridge, with its exposed steelwork, is sometimes cited as an example of structural expressionism where the structure is the aesthetic.
Fascinating. Okay, one last piece. The street grid. That rigid grid in Manhattan seems so fundamental. Was it always planned that way?
North of 14th Street, yes, mostly. The Commissioner's Plan of 1811 was incredibly ambitious, maybe ruthless, depending on your view. Well, it prioritized easy real estate development over topography or existing paths. Just laid down this relentless grid of numbered avenues and perpendicular streets. Efficient for selling lots, maybe less so for interesting streetscapes. Frederick Law Olmsted, who designed Central Park, was famously critical of the grid's monotony.
But it undeniably shaped Manhattan's development.
Fundamentally, it
Yeah.
is the framework for how that part of the city grew.
So, wrapping this up, it's really clear New York's architecture isn't static. It's this living museum, almost.
Totally, a constantly evolving record of technology, money, style, zoning laws, culture, public arguments. It's all there.
You see that interplay constantly. And the contrast between Manhattan's density and, say, the single-family homes in Queens or Staten Island is stark.
Yeah, different boroughs, different stories, but all part of the same complex city.
It really does make you think about how this constant architectural churn reflects and shapes life in the city and its image to the world. What's next? What future designs will redefine this skyline again?
Hard to say, but change is the only constant, right?
Indeed. So for our listener, after this deep dive, is there one building, one style, one architectural detail in New York that now holds a new layer of meaning for you? Something to think about. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.